It's the end of the Middle Ages. 50 million people had died from the Black Death. That's 60% of Europe's total population. The effect of this Black Death, a breakdown of society, a breakdown of feudalism. Serfs left the farms and fled to the cities. Languages changed. Art changed. But what did they change to? This lecture is about the Renaissance. The Renaissance begins in northern Italy, roughly around the year 1300, and stretches all the way up to about 1600, although those periods can be adjusted a little bit from nation to nation. Renaissance actually comes from the Italian word for rebirth. So I guess the question is, what was being reborn? Well, remembering that it started in Italy, in the ruins of the ancient Roman world, will kind of give us a hint. What they wanted to birth again, to bring back, was classicism. They saw the art and the language and the culture of the Middle Ages as vastly inferior to the art of ancient Rome and ancient Greece. And in the ruins of this ancient Roman temple, this ancient Roman architecture, they found the remnants of that once great architecture, of that once great art, of that once great power, Rome. And they decided to rebuild that. That's what the Renaissance was. With the decay of feudalism, with the collapse of this system where kings would exchange land for service to landlords, who would then exchange land to service to their vassals, all the way down to the peasants. With the collapse of that system in the Middle Ages and the fleeing of the peasants to the cities, something new is going to emerge. Europe begins to see itself as a continent of nations, of city-states in Italy, independent governments with their own princes, and merchants become more powerful. No longer tied to the land, a new form of, we'll call it proto-capitalism, develops, where merchants could start to form these guilds and they could start to charge for their product. And money was abundant. And suddenly, patrons started to appear. Bankers like the Fuggers, princes like the Medici. Even the church starts acting as patrons of the arts during the Renaissance. These merchant classes that we talked about, they didn't inherit their land. They weren't a naturally noble class. They survived by their wits, their wisdom, their guile. And probably the greatest of these was the Medici family. The Medici family began as a family of merchants, but very quickly went into banking, and soon became the bankers for the wealthiest people throughout Europe. Cosimo Medici, or you may hear him called Cosmo Medici, Cosimo Medici, in his own lifetime, was the wealthiest man in the world. His son, Lorenzo de' Medici, becomes a power not only as a merchant, but a power in the Catholic Church and a patron of the arts, a man without whom there couldn't have been a Renaissance. During this Renaissance period, this rebirth of learning that we had going on, a lot of ancient manuscripts made their way to Italy through Christian scholars. You see, during the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages as we used to call it, there had been these monks that had been just frantically copying down the literature of Christendom. And in these ancient monasteries, we can rediscover our own history. We can rediscover our own art. And a new philosophy comes out from this. It's a philosophy called humanism. Humanism is not the absence of God. A humanist can also be a Christian. What humanism is, it was this belief that you should live your life in a worldly, human-centered manner. The humanities, history, philosophy, literature. These are three things that weren't really considered important in the Middle Ages. But by the Renaissance, they become extremely important. So much so that the Renaissance man would be a student of history. He would be able to quote the great speeches of Cicero from literature. And he would understand philosophers like Niccolo Machiavelli, the man who said the end justifies the means, and that it's better to be feared than loved. This is a different kind of time period. This is a different kind of man. I would argue that Renaissance man is the first modern man. I think we can understand where they come from.